Hi, my name is Casper René Johansen and I'm your YouTube philosopher. This video here is about Spinoza and his concept of God, but it's also about process theology. What is process theology? I usually call myself a process philosopher, but I never really talk that much about process theology. So this video is also a kind of an introduction to what is process theology and what is a process theism. And the big question, is Spinoza such a process theologist? Or is he even a process philosopher when it comes to it? This video here is made in collabs with my friends over at Seekers of Unity, and you can check the link to their channel in the descriptions. They have lots of great philosophical videos over on their channel, Seekers of Unity, and they have a series on Spinoza's philosophy and especially about Spinoza's metaphysics. So you can go over at their channel and look at that, watch that series about Spinoza. And their latest video is about Spinoza on happiness, and it goes deep into his idea of within his metaphysics about free will. Do we even have free will according to Spinoza? You can go over at Seekers of Unity. There's a link in the descriptions. You can go over and check their videos out on Spinoza and all kinds of other stuff. Spinoza's God has been very, very highly revered as something special, even for those in the Romantic movement in the 18th century. The Romantic philosophical movement, they revered Spinoza's God as something special, but not just the Romantics. Even Albert Einstein saw something special in Spinoza's concept of God. Albert Einstein, he actually said that he believed in the God of Spinoza. A Romantic philosopher like Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he suggested that Spinoza's writing was the closest any mortal had come to apprehending God. So that's quite big. And it's also said that Spinoza was drunk with God. So there's a lot of interesting anecdotes out there on Spinoza's God. I talked a lot about process philosophy on this channel, and you can go ahead and watch my videos that I have done on this process philosophy. I'm gonna come here with an ultra short introduction to what process philosophy is. It actually stems back to Heraclitus in ancient Greece, who said you cannot step twice into the same river. It's not the same river that flows through the river. You're not the same as the one who stepped into the river again. That's the point of Heraclitus here. It's also called pantarei, which means everything flows. But in more modern times, in the 20th century, there was a man called Alfred North Whitehead, who wrote this Process and Reality, and he kind of labeled this process philosophy and started this modern approach to process thinking. And he himself kind of, with his process philosophy, he himself kind of leaps into the realm of philosophy, of religion, and he goes into this concept of a God when it comes to it. Not all process philosophers concerns themselves with a God concept, and a lot of process philosophy take on this naturalistic view of the world and speak of processes without even mention or thinking about a God concept, because you don't really have to, according to a process thinking. But Some process philosophers, they go over and become a process theism. But let me read you something from this process and reality. The church gave unto God the attributes which belonged exclusively to Caesar. This God that comes forth here has the attributes of Caesar, but it's what the church gave on to this God. That means he's what was Caesar? He was the leader. He was first citizen, he was called, and he was a dictator. He was in charge, and he could give punishment, and he could wage war and so forth, and he basically controlled your life if you didn't do what he said, what he commanded. That's the attributes that the church gave on to God, the attributes of Caesar. That's not the process philosophy God. That is not the God of process theology. Whitehead comes up with some statements about this God of his, this process God. One can say some true statements about this God. And I'm gonna read them up because it's much easier for me to read them up. It is true to say that God is permanent and the world fluent, as the world is permanent and God is fluent. It is true to say God is one and the world many, as that the world is one and God many. It is true to say that in comparison with the world, God is actually eminently, as that in comparison with God and the world is actually eminently. It is true to say that the world is immanent in God and that God is immanent in the world. It is true to say that God transcends the world, as that God is. It is true to say that God transcends the world, as that the world transcends God. It is true to say God creates the world, as that the world creates God. So it's kind of like a twofold God here. It's both immanent and it's not immanent. The world is immanent and the God is immanent. The point here that God is has many sides and is actually all and is actually nothing. Spinoza lived in the 16th century, and he's often also referred to as a kind of a atheistic philosopher, which seems strange when we're talking about Spinoza's God, and his concept of a God is very revered. He was actually slandered for being a pagan atheist at his own time, because he goes against the traditional viewpoint of a God, and that's also something that process theology does. It goes away from this general viewpoint of a God, which even Whitehead in his process reality stipulated. Remember that the church gave on to God the attributes of Caesar, and that's not something process philosophy has. That's not something that for process theology thinks that God has these attributes from Caesar, and that's also something that Spinoza also would say. Is Spinoza a process philosopher? Yes and no, one could say. It depends kind of on your interpretation, your technicality of some specific philosophical viewpoint of concepts. But I'm adherent to that concept has a certain plasticity, and I think that also in process philosophy there should be a fluidity in our concepts because they have fluctuation. They are in process themselves. And that's what this process philosophy is. Everything is process. Everything changes. That's what you can boil this Heraclitus river down to, that everything changes, everything flows. So that's with Spinoza, and Spinoza's God is even a process philosopher. One can say that Spinoza says that everything is one substance when it comes to it. Everything is just one substance. So you have this reductio philosophy, which is also process philosophy, that everything is process. With Spinoza, everything is actually just one substance, which is the entire universe. That is one substance. There may be other modes of this substance, but when it comes to it, there's only one substance, and that is God. So it's not even process philosophy, because process philosophy is also famous for saying that there are no substances when it comes to it, that a substance is a thing, and they should not be viewed as a permanent thing. They should viewed as being in process, in fluctuation, in constant moving. So we have a problem here to say that Spinoza is a process philosopher when he says there's a substance. But Whitehead, he says in Process Reality that this is kind of a what Spinoza understood about substance, and he was talking into what his timeline was thinking about, his zeitgeist, so to say. So he's just talking about within his zeitgeist about these substances. But if you kind of adjust Spinoza's philosophy, and Whitehead's idea would say that Spinoza probably meant this, but he used the language of his zeitgeist's terminology back then to call it substance. But if you adjust it, it could be called a process, that the world is just one entire process, and there are modes to this process. There are expressions of this one process. And that's what also you could boil process philosophy down to, that I'm in process. I'm in the process of making this video. The river is a process. Everybody's a process. This corona pandemic is a process that we're in right now, the corona pandemic. But you can boil it down to that's actually just one giant mega process that's going on, and that's the universe itself. And all other processes out there are sub-process or micro-processes to that mega process that's out there. And you can call that mega process God. You can give the concept of God to that mega process. And that's also what Spinoza does with his philosophy, with his one substance, his totality. He calls that totality, it's equal to God, that is God. He is a pantheist. It's not a label for Spinoza. So, and what is pantheism? It's that the sum of everything is God, that everything is God, it's equal to God. And that's the same with Spinoza's one substance, the totality of everything is God. But what else do Spinoza says about this God? Well, Spinoza's God is it's not an anthropomorphic God. What is an anthropomorphic God? An anthropomorphic God is something that is described of as having human attributes, like consciousness, for instance. That it's a kind of a person of some sort. with a conscience, human-like conscience, because we are modeled in the image of God. That's usually the thing. But for Spinoza, this totality, this one substance, is not a personal God. It's not an anthropomorphic God. What is God, according to process theologists, is not an personal God with the attributes like human attributes like consciousness and an intelligence that kind of is like a human being with planning and so forth. It's not that kind of a deity you find in process theology. According to Spinoza, God is also kind of equal to nature. God is nature, that's all there really is. And man is also nature. So God is nature, and we're part of this nature. We are modes of God, we are modes of God, expressions of God, you can say. But I found kind of five ways that process theology differs from a classical theology, and it's in this book, Process Theology and Introductory Exposition. And one thing God is not, according to process theology, is God is a cosmic moralist. God, remember, it's not this anthropomorphic God. He doesn't think like us. They're doing it wrong down there. That's not the way to behave. They should be punished accordingly, and they should kind of nudge to behave in a specific way. No, that's not something that process theology denies. That sort of a God. It's something else entirely for a process theologist. Would Spinoza say yes to this? I think he would. That Spinoza's God is not this anthropomorphic thinking God that's a moralist. He actually says that nature and God doesn't really care about us and our actions. Spinoza says that in a way that he doesn't really care about us. That's not something that God concerns us with our doings. So yes, Spinoza would also say yes to this, that God is not a cosmic moralist. Now the second thing in this book is God as unchanging and passionless absolute. And that's the whole process for philosophy thing. If there is a God, it changes. It is also in flux. It is also in a state of movement, and is also in process. This process God. So it cannot be unchangeable. But is Spinoza's God unchangeable? Are we getting technical here? And I'm not sure about the interpretation, or even my interpretation of this and Spinoza's God, but there are some unchangeable aspects to Spinoza's God, because it's governed by natural laws, according to Spinoza, that God and nature are governed by its own natural laws, and they are probably unchangeable. I think he would be into this Platonic idea, Spinoza, that there's unchangeable ideas or laws that's governing nature. While a process theologist would deny this. So technically this might not be what Spinoza would deny, that God is unchangeable. God as a controlling power. It's the notion that suggests that God determines every detail in the world. When a loved one dies, presumably the question why is often asked instinctively, meaning why did God choose to take this life at this time? Also when humanly destructive natural events such as hurricanes occur, legal jargon speaks of acts of God. On the positive side, a woman may thank God for rescuing her husband from a collapsed coal mine, while the husband of a dozen other women are lost. But what kind of God would be who spares one while allowing others to perish. Process theology denies the existence of this God, the one who's in control of everything. There is a kind of a self-governing evolution movement going on within the maker process of God. Whitehead actually also at one point calls God creativity, that God is equal to creativity out of chaos. But he's not a controlling power, he just creates, and the process creates itself and continually creates and unfolds itself. So theologist denies this controlling power. Again, it's kind of like the cosmic moralist, controlling what happens, who dies, who lives, and what happens. Let's send a hurricane to this. It's not that kind of God you find in theology, in process theology. But what about Spinoza? Would Spinoza say yes to denying this? And I think he would. God as sanctioner of the status quo. That's also something that process theology denies. That there is a kind of a status quo, and it's kind of not that changeable. There is always a status quo of some sort, and God sanctions this. No, process theologist denies this. But Spinoza, again, we have to get technical there, and I'm not sure about this one. I think it's would be either or something. A little of both maybe for Spinoza on this one. Now the last one, God as male, that's something that's denied for process theologists. Because again, that's the anthropomorphic God. As male, as a father figure. The attributes of Caesar, remember? Would Spinoza also deny that God is male? Yes, because for him, God is an impersonal one. It's equal to nature. It's that, so it doesn't have this anthropomorphic form for Spinoza. So he would say yes to this. So all in all, is Spinoza a process philosopher? I would say like kind of a 70-80% process philosopher when it comes to it. Is he a process theologist? Again, maybe 70%, 60% process theologist. Again, it's about a technicality here, and that's also why, and I admit this in this video, that I myself is not a process theologist. I'm a process philosopher. And that's for me because things get kind of blurry for me and loses its plasticity, the concepts, when you go into a concept of God. I'm not denying that there can be a divinity or a miraculous way out there, or something transcends the world, or something. I'm not in that to kind of unspiritualize life or anything like that. But I will not label something as God or not God, because for me it loses its plasticity. So I will keep on probably being a process philosopher and kind of have a more philosophically natural viewpoint of what is going on and what I think is going on, and what our understanding of the world is and the universe is and what life is. Is it equal to God, the world, the galaxy, life? I don't know. But it's an easy concept to put up there. Okay, it's God. And you can call it God. Of course you can. And I can talk to you even if you call it God. But I don't have to go there. I don't want to go there. I'm a process philosopher and not a process theologist. Process theologists, they actually believe in evolution. because evolution is a process. There were dinosaurs, and we evolved from fish to reptiles and dinosaurs, onto proto-mammals to man. It's a process of evolution. So process theologists, they also believe in an evolution that has taken place on Earth, which is good, I think, because I also think there is a sort of thing like evolution that has transpired here on Earth. So this video here was made in collabs with Seekers of Unity, a great philosophical channel. So you can go over at their channel, there's a link in the description, and watch their videos on Spinoza. They have a special series about Spinoza and his philosophy, and their latest video, Spinoza on happiness, you can go and check that out. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in my next video.